Do you think Canada is on the verge of shifting the global energy export balance with just one first shipment? The 30th of June marked a significant milestone as Shell's LNG Canada project completed its first LNG export from Kityat. This is the first time Canada officially enters the large-scale LNG export market. The first LNG shipment set sail from the British Columbia coast, opening a direct supply route to Asia, cutting transportation time compared to U.S. Gulf Coast ports, which must go through the Panama Canal. This could change the supply-demand dynamics as Canada is now bringing liquefied natural gas to the international market with lower shipping costs and a safer route. The U.S. has been Canada's primary gas export partner, purchasing about 8.88 billion cubic feet of Canadian gas per day in 2024. With the pipeline being nearly the only outlet, Canada was dependent on the U.S. market. Now LNG exports allow Canada to reduce its risk if U.S. policies or prices change. This event also signals increased competition for the U.S. energy sector. As Canada offers competitive products to the same Asian markets, U.S. energy companies will certainly need to reassess their pricing strategies and market share in this new environment. The LNG Canada project isn't stopping at its first shipment. The plant has a designed capacity of 14 million tons per year, equivalent to 1.9 billion cubic feet of gas per day, once regasified. Just the potential revenue from exports to Asia at current prices could reach $8 billion per year when both trains are operating at full capacity. Currently, the first train is running at 6.5 million tons per year, initially at half load for adjustments. Notably, another expansion phase is under consideration, potentially adding 2 more trains to increase the total capacity to 28 million tons per year. The final investment decision for Phase 2 could be made next year. This is not only the largest energy project in Canada today, but also a $40 billion investment involving Shell, Petronas, Petrokina, Mitsubishi, and Korea Gas. Over 9,000 workers were involved in the construction phase, and more than 5.8 billion CAD in contracts were awarded to local businesses and First Nations partners. This shows the massive scale and economic impact, not just on the energy industry, but also on local communities. LNG Canada's greatest strength is its direct access to the growing demand in Asia. Japan, South Korea, and China are all seeking stable and lower-risk LNG supplies. By exporting by ship from the Pacific coast, Canada reduces transit time by several days. For Canada, opening up the Asian market is a way to reduce its almost complete dependence on pipelines to the U.S. This is a risk diversification strategy, creating additional trade options and generating significant foreign exchange earnings. For the public, this could lead to more job opportunities in extraction, transportation, and associated services, but will also require careful environmental monitoring and infrastructure development. Shell views LNG Canada as a key part of its global strategy. The company forecasts global LNG demand will increase by 60% by 2040, primarily driven by the demand for cleaner energy in Asia. Shell currently controls about 10% of the global LNG fleet and sells up to 66 million tons of LNG annually. The company expects to add another 12 million tons of annual capacity by the end of the decade through expansions and new partnerships. In the context of the global energy transition, LNG Canada will help Shell solidify its position as a leading LNG supplier and help Canada assert its growing importance on the global energy export map. In 2025, what was once a close partnership between the U.S. and Canada suddenly spiraled into a fierce trade conflict over steel and aluminum. The U.S. decision to impose a 50% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum dropped the metal curtain at the Canadian border, sparking a brutal trade war and raising serious questions about the future of North American integration. The U.S. and Canada, longtime allies with the world's longest unmilitarized border, had always been tightly bound in trade, supply chains, and defense cooperation. But in 2025, everything flipped under the guise of national security. Trump raised tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum from 25% to 50%, targeting a close ally. At the signing ceremony, Trump declared, Strong trade is a strong military. Weak steel is a weak border. This felt like more than just an economic break. It was a rupture in trust. Ottawa was quick to react. The very next day, Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke out. In a nationally televised address, he called this a global move, signaling that the U.S. action would have consequences beyond just the bilateral relationship. He sent a stern message. Canada would retaliate, protecting national interests while trying to avoid disrupting the global order. One key phrase stood out in his speech: a unified Canadian economy. This wasn't just a catchy slogan. It marked a shift in Ottawa's economic thinking, moving from reliance on North American harmony to a commitment to creating a self-sustaining fortress. The very next morning, Canada introduced a framework for retaliatory tariffs. The tariff on U.S. steel and aluminum would start at 25% and increase over time. The innovative part was that the tariff rate wasn't fixed, but would adjust automatically based on the pace of economic and security negotiations. Ottawa no longer had to wait for a cabinet meeting to make a decision. Tariffs could rise or fall depending on the situation. This wasn't the first time Canada had retaliated against Trump's steel tariffs. This happened in 2018, but this time the response was more measured and strategic. It wasn't just about tit for tat, it was about setting up a long-term strategy. According to Canada's Finance Minister, François-Philippe Champagne, federally funded infrastructure projects, from modernizing naval ships to building high-speed rail lines, would now be required to use Canadian-made steel and aluminum. International contractors could still bid, but they had to disclose the origins of their materials. Clearly, Canada wanted American businesses to build their factories within Canada. One of the most impactful and far-reaching measures Canada introduced was a strategic origin-based quota system for key steel and aluminum products. This meant that in addition to facing higher import tariffs, U.S. exporters would be limited in the amount of goods they could send to Canada with the possibility of retroactive enforcement. This rule came as a true shock to businesses and supply chains. Imagine a major manufacturing plant once reliant on a steady supply of materials, now facing not just skyrocketing material costs, but restrictions on the amount they could purchase each month. They would be forced to quickly find alternatives, adjust production plans, and cope with the threat of severe shortages. The short-term effects of tariffs and quotas were inevitable, impacting both economies. For businesses, particularly those in key sectors like automotive and construction that consume large amounts of steel and aluminum, the sudden rise in input costs put enormous pressure on them. The uncertainty in trade policy also created a risky business environment, making companies hesitant to invest or expand production. The just-in-time supply chain model between the U.S. and Canada, built on trust and efficiency, had been severely damaged. Cargo containers were being denied or stuck at ports, and supply chain managers in industrial centers like Detroit and Windsor struggled to find alternative sources, revealing how fragile the system was to policy shock. This forced businesses to reconsider their strategies, possibly shifting to a just-in-case model, accepting higher storage costs to ensure supply, but sacrificing efficiency and competitiveness. Ultimately, the burden of these disruptions often fell on consumers, leading to higher prices on goods. Canada also introduced the melt cast origin rule, which required products to prove that the melting and casting process occurred within the same value chain to this targeted American companies that had been skirting the rules by importing cheap steel from China, processing it in Mexico, and labeling it made in USA to qualify for trade benefits when exporting to Canada with the new system. Canada's Border Services Agency could rigorously verify product origins, protecting the domestic market from trade fraud. Faced with unprecedented challenges from the trade war, the Canadian government wasn't just focusing on short-term countermeasures. It was actively implementing long-term strategies to restructure the economy and boost domestic production capacity. A large-scale credit program worth $10 billion was set up and entrusted to the Canada Development Bank tool. This program aimed not only to provide low-interest loans to companies heavily impacted by tariffs, but also required businesses to submit a detailed plan to relocate their supply chains within Canada's borders to qualify for assistance. In parallel, Canada's industrial relocation and employment development strategy was ramped up through adjustments to the investment criteria of the Canada Infrastructure Fund. The fund would now prioritize infrastructure projects that use domestically produced metals. The US-Canada tariff war wasn't just a battle between two governments. It directly affected the everyday lives of people. For consumers, the most noticeable consequence was a wave of price hikes on essential goods, cars, building materials, household appliances, and canned foods. As steel and aluminum became more expensive, the reduced purchasing power and higher living costs hit hardest on middle and low-income families. The risk of widespread inflation forced many people to tighten their spending or dip into savings and investments. For workers, the picture was more divided. The domestic steel and aluminum industries in Canada were temporarily shielded, helping maintain or even create jobs in metal refineries and processing plants. However, industries that used imported metals, like automotive construction and machinery manufacturing, found themselves cornered by soaring input costs. This led to the risk of reduced production, shorter working hours, and even layoffs. The disruption in the supply chain extended from large corporations to small subcontractors, leaving thousands of workers at every link in the chain facing uncertainty. For most people, this trade war wasn't a far-off political issue. It was a daily reality impacting their meals, jobs, and wallets. The 2025 tariff war between the US and Canada revealed a stark truth. No curtain is thick enough. No self-sufficiency is free. Amid the walls and bridges, which choice will shape the future of North America and the global supply chain? Only time will tell. 37,000 cars stuck, ports clogged, supply chains on the verge of collapse. U.S. car imports due to President Trump's tariff plan. Now, that includes about 37,000 cars sitting at U.S. ports right now. Slowdown has begun. Bookings of container shipments from China to the U.S. are down nearly 50%. Not because of war, not because of a pandemic, but because of one order: tariffs. As of June 2025, more than 37,000 imported cars are sitting idle at U.S. ports. It's not because of storms, it's not because of labor shortages. It's because of one decision: tariffs. President Trump's new tariff plan targeting Chinese goods has nearly frozen the trans-Pacific supply chain. Orders for containers have dropped by nearly half, causing a ripple effect. Goods are canned, ports are congested, parts aren't making it to factories, and production is at a standstill. Before the tensions escalated, U.S.-China trade was a cornerstone of the economy. In 2018 alone, the U.S. imported more than $539 billion in goods from China, according to the Baker Institute. But as soon as tariffs took effect, shipments were delayed or vanished from schedules entirely. The impact has been twofold and very real. In May, the Port of Los Angeles recorded only 716,000 TEUs of cargo, its lowest in 2 years, down 5% from the same time last year. Of the 80 ships scheduled to arrive, 17 were canceled. Long Beach dropped by 21% and Oakland fell by 15%. It's estimated that just a 1% decrease in cargo could cost 2,800 jobs, with another 4,000 at risk. China's situation isn't any better. Exports to the U.S. dropped 35% in May, down to $28.80 billion. Industrial growth slowed to 5.8%. 8%, the lowest it's been all year. But what worries me even more than the numbers is the growing sense of unease among small business owners. They're no longer willing to order in bulk because they can't be sure if their containers will even make it through. Many store owners are now giving customers 3 price scenarios: if goods arrive on time, if they're hit with mid-shipment tariffs, or if they never arrive at all. And ultimately, it's the consumer who's bearing the brunt. Help! We're seeing prices for electronics, kitchen appliances, and car parts skyrocket. Fewer options are available. Many store owners are now giving customers 3 price scenarios: if goods arrive on time, if they're hit with mid-shipment tariffs, or if they never arrive at all. And ultimately, it's the consumer who's bearing the brunt. Help! We're seeing prices for electronics, kitchen appliances, and car parts skyrocket. Fewer options are available. I can just hear a customer cancel an order because the price changed suddenly. Oh, that's how I know the trade war isn't just a headline. It's daily life. China didn't respond with words. They responded with action. U.S. soybean and pork contracts were quickly replaced by Brazil. No warning necessary. Instead of announcing retaliatory tariffs, they've extended customs, processing times, and tightened inspections, which has caused American goods to be delayed or even lost. He told me his harvest this year was excellent, but there's nowhere to send it. Old contracts were canceled and there are no new ones. The market is shifting and the U.S. is losing its central position. When Brazil or Vietnam step in to fill the gap, customers won't be coming back anytime soon. Major ports from Los Angeles to Savannah are seeing something unprecedented. Cargo ships canned in large numbers, containers stuck, and cranes idled. In Los Angeles alone, 10 ships were cut in just 2 weeks, more than the entire year of 2024 combined. A quarter of trans-Pacific trips vanished from the schedule. I've stood in the Long Beach container yard. Rows of trucks were parked. A worker told me, "Without cargo, we have no work." The ripple effects are spreading across the entire supply chain. The United States has just surpassed a staggering $36 trillion in national debt, and no one saw it coming. There was no emergency meeting, no urgent headlines, just total silence. But behind the scenes, a quiet exodus is happening. Ford is building a factory in Ontario. Tesla is relocating engineers to Quebec. And Campbell is canning soup in Toronto. As Trump promised to make America great again, industrial icons are fleeing. Something is seriously wrong. And the big question is, what do they know that we do not? As of June 2025, the U.S. national debt has soared past $36 trillion, the highest in history, double what it was just 10 years ago. Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump is running for re-election with a massive spending bill, increasing defense budgets, cutting corporate taxes, and pushing for major infrastructure and industrial investments. According to the Congressional Budget Office, this bill alone could add another $2.8 trillion to the national debt over the next 10 years. But that's not all. The U.S. continues spending tens of billions on global hotspots from Eastern Europe to the Middle East, while also committing to domestic investments to make America great again, with an elusive promise of 3% growth every year for the next decade. Think of America like a middle-class family that is used to spending beyond its means. Over several presidentships, they have relied on credit cards to live comfortably. Now Trump comes back saying, "Just spend more. I will invest and make the money to pay it back." The issue is, there is no proof these investments will actually pay off. Every promise of growth is clashing with reality. Soaring interest rates, shaky market confidence, and companies pulling out. What the media calls government spending to boost the economy is turning into a double-edged sword, driving borrowing costs up across the board. And what no one dares to say is if growth does not materialize soon, America could slowly slip into a default cycle, much like Greece did in 2010. During World War II, America carried more than 100% of its GDP in debt to fight the Nazis. But after victory, the economy boomed and the debt was gradually reduced. During the 2008 financial crisis, debt also spiked but was later controlled. Now in 2025, the U.S. debt to GDP ratio has surpassed 100%, but there is no war, no reconstruction, and no clear plan for debt reduction. Experts predict that if all of Trump's promises are kept, this ratio could reach 143 to 161% by 2035. And without intervention, the Congressional Budget Office forecasts that U.S. debt could hit 200 to 250% of GDP in the coming decades. That is the level Greece hit before spiraling into chaos, cutting pensions, closing hospitals, and losing an entire generation. The U.S. spending policy in 2025 is not just unusual, it is dangerously extreme. Trump's beautiful bill, as he calls it, is designed to reshape the economy by cutting taxes, investing in industry, cutting regulations, and aiming for steady 3% growth over the next decade. But according to the Federal Budget Committee, if all the measures in this bill are enacted, the national debt will increase from $36 trillion to $50 trillion over the next 10 to 12 years.